The night hung thick with the scent of damp earth and the quiet rustle of leaves, a stillness that was both comforting and foreboding. Just beyond the edge of the woods, a farmer named Roy had drifted off in his small, rickety house, dreaming of sweet rains and bountiful harvests. His world was simple: growing crops, tending to livestock, and finding joy in small, sunlit moments. But danger lurked in the shadows, hidden just out of sight. Under the cover of darkness, three figures crept toward the storage shed at the back of Roy's property. Dressed in black, they moved with an air of practiced confidence, their breath slow and steady, disguising the urgency of their mission. This was no ordinary heist. They targeted Roy's prized possessions: high-end tools, vintage tractors, and equipment that could turn a profit. They were aware that middle-of-the-night thefts often went unnoticed, especially in remote areas like this one, where the vastness of darkness acted as a shroud. With every step, the thieves exchanged furtive glances, their hearts racing with both excitement and fear. Just a few more minutes and they'd be in and out before anyone knew. The leader of the trio, a tall, steely-eyed man named Jake, crouched low beside the fence, motioning for the others to follow. "Stay quiet." As they approached the storage shed, illuminated under the dim, flickering lights of a nearby lamppost, the wind whispered through the trees, almost as if warning them of the trap they were stepping into. Roy might have been sound asleep, but he was not foolhardy. A man like him, hardworking and endlessly optimistic, had learned the ropes of protecting what mattered. Months before, he had felt that gnawing inkling in his gut. A sense of unease had washed over him while counting his tools, and he could no longer ignore it. So he had prepared. The thieves slipped inside the shed, the heavy wooden door creaking slightly. In the flickering glow of a flashlight, they scanned the vast inner space, cluttered with all things a farmer could love: shovels, fertilizers, bright red tractors that gleamed even in the dim light. Each item held a story, a memory forged in sweat and toil, but to the thieves, they were nothing more than dollar signs. Just as they began to load tools into dark sacks, a low, rumbling sound echoed through the air. The noise sent tremors down their spines. Was it just the wind, or someone far more sinister? Suddenly, out from the shadows, a figure loomed. It was Roy, dressed not in night clothes but in sturdy jeans and a plaid shirt, shadows dancing across his determined face. His eyes blazed, full of surprise, but more than that, they burned with the fierce spirit of a protector. He had not only prepared but positioned himself quietly, waiting for this very moment. "You picked the wrong house," he spoke, his voice low yet commanding. The trio froze, a mix of shock and panic coursing through them. "Just let us take a few tools, old man," Jake sneered, stepping forward, but Roy was ready. He had anticipated this confrontation. Every night spent glancing out into the darkness, waiting and plotting, had prepared him for this moment. With swift precision, Roy tapped a button on a small handheld device resting in his pocket. Suddenly, floodlights burst to life, illuminating the entire yard with blinding brilliance. The thieves squinted against the sudden glare, their faces a study of shock and disbelief. They had thought they were clever, but they had underestimated the farmer. This night, it seemed, had more surprises in store. As the blinding light surrounded them, Roy's demeanor shifted from defensive to assertive. The floodlights painted his figure as a silhouette of fury and courage. He shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. His adrenaline surged, pushing him forward with the strength of resolve. By now, the thieves were trapped, stripped of their confidence and poised to bolt, but not without facing the man of the land who had withstood storms and challenges far heavier than their weighty ambitions. Jake glanced at his accomplices, and in that split second, they made eye contact, shifting gears from thieves to cornered animals. They backed away toward the shed's exit, eyes darting for escape, but Roy had anticipated that too. The door behind them slammed shut with a resounding thud. "No escape, boys," he said, his tone almost chillingly calm. He had installed a rudimentary locking mechanism with a big chain, something he was proud of. Today it would serve him loyally. Panic pierced through the air like a knife. One of the thieves whimpered, his bravado evaporating under the intensity of Roy's gaze. What transpired next was not just a battle of brawn, it was a confrontation of minds. Roy didn't just want to scare them, he wanted them to understand the weight of their choices. "You've disrupted my life, my work. I've earned everything here." Tension filled the air, thick as fog. The female thief, a wiry figure named Sarah, blinked hard, her facade of bravery breaking. She shifted her position slightly, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. Roy caught it. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a softer intonation. In the stillness, silence hovered like a thick cloud. It crackled with an unspoken truth, raw and aching. "It's not what you think," Jake replied defensively, still clutching his bag of stolen tools. "We're desperate. We need money." His voice trailed off, but that moment of vulnerability hung heavy. Roy felt the air change. This was not just about him facing off against faithless thieves. It was about lives intersecting, motivations clashing, two worlds colliding in dramatic irony. "I understand desperation," he said slowly, carefully choosing his words. "But this..." For the first time, doubt began to creep into their demeanor. The bravado of the night began to dissolve. Laughter, anger, and fear intertwined all too easily when someone else's livelihood was at stake. Roy took a deep breath, forging ahead, tapping into something deeper. "I could call the police," he continued, his voice steady. "But what would that accomplish? Do you want a record? You want to throw your lives away for some tools?" He glanced around at the shed, the years of dedication etched into every object. Sarah stuttered, her hands trembling. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps hope, but regardless, she clung to that spark of conversation. "You want tools? Let's talk about this. You can work the fields. I could use an extra hand." His words echoed in the air, filled with sincerity. The silence wrapped around them, thick and heavy. Uncertainty danced in their eyes, but buried beneath layers of stubbornness was the glimmer of a chance, a flicker of hope. What if there was another route, a different path that didn't involve being chased or caught or ruined? "This isn't who you are," Roy pressed gently, a fatherly wisdom surfacing. "You can make a fresh start." Jake glanced at his partners, uncertainty written all over his features. "I know you can," he replied, his voice low and steady. This man had coaxed life from dusty ground. He knew about starting afresh. In that moment, he reached out instead of pushing them further away. As they shifted, weighing the shift in their circumstances, the atmosphere crackled with tension. The cold night air now felt warm, as if possibility had breezed in through the crevices. Maybe they didn't have to be defined by their desperate choices. Roy smiled, revealing a hint of vulnerability too. "I'll bring you back to the house and we'll sit down and talk about next steps." His confident smile brought a flicker of hope, a vision of redemption. The thieves shared glances, disbelief, surprise, and a twinge of newfound hope blossoming amidst their failures. Perhaps this was an opportunity to turn their lives around, to step out of the darkness and into the light. As Roy unlocked the door, allowing them to pass back outside, the night air felt different. The moon whispered through high branches, as if acknowledging the transformation that had unfolded in that quiet storage shed. In that moment, they weren't just thieves nor a farmer, but stories intertwining, each one capable of rewriting its narrative. A chance encounter had gifted them a new beginning far away from darkness, into the dawn of something profoundly better. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, a strange new resolve enveloped them. The shadows of their past didn't have to consume their future. In the hands of a man who believed in second chances, there was power in transformation, a chance to labor anew. They didn't just leave empty-handed. They walked away with the weight of possibility as their most valuable tool. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin tingle. The moon hung high, a solitary witness against a backdrop of deep, ink-black sky. On a remote patch of land nestled among rolling hills, a weathered barn stood, shadows whispering secrets of hard work and long days. Inside that barn lay treasures accumulated over years, tools, machinery, and equipment that held more than just monetary value. To Roy, the farmer who had toiled this land with calloused hands and an unwavering spirit, these possessions were symbols of his hard-earned life. While the world outside slumbered, a trio of figures scuttled like phantoms across the landscape. Cloaked in dark hoodies, they moved with the stealth of practiced thieves, guided by the nagging hunger for quick cash and an easy haul. Their eyes glinted with anticipation, each step taking them closer to their goal. This was not their first attempt, but it felt different, more alive, electric with the thrill of the unknown. Jake, the mastermind, led the way, his heart drumming loudly in his chest. "Keep it down," he whispered, casting glances over his shoulder as they approached the barn's back door. The dim light from a nearby street lamp barely touched the ground, creating a hushed canvas of twilight that made their shadows dance. The two followers nodded, fear mingling with excitement. They reached the barn door and paused, breath shallow, ears straining for any sound. In that moment, time felt suspended, a heartbeat, a breath, an unshared glance. Then, with a swift tug, Jake flung the door open, and the creaking wood echoed through the stillness of night. Inside, a world of temptation unfolded. Rusty tools hung from walls, and shiny tractors stood like proud soldiers, waiting to be taken. It was a treasure trove made for thieves to them. It represented freedom from their mundane lives and an escape from their failures. They stepped in, adrenaline surging, focused on the bounty before them. But unknown to them, somewhere behind the barn's facade, Roy was wide awake. He had spent years understanding the land, the cycles of nature, but the unnerving stillness had stirred something primal within him. His instincts kicked in. He knew something was amiss. After installing an extra lock on the barn and setting up motion sensors around the edges of his property just days before, his vigilance prepared him for this very moment. Outside, the thieves began to fill their bags. Each clang of metal echoed like a siren song. The heavier the bag grew, the more their bravado swelled. One of them exclaimed, stuffing a shiny wrench into his sack. Laughter slipped from their lips, but it wasn't the kind filled with joy. It was underpinned with desperation, a symbol of decisions they regretted the moment they made them. But as they filled their bags blissfully, they forgot one fundamental truth. Roy had once been a young man, too. He had known desperation, risk, and choices. And he had decided years ago to protect what mattered most. Steeling himself, he slipped on his boots and moved quietly toward the window of the barn, carefully peering in. What he saw filled him with a mixture of rage and resolve. The sight of strangers rifling through his belongings ignited a fire in his gut. These thieves had crossed a line, and they were about to find out that he was ready for them. With determination boiling within him, he grabbed his trusty old radio, a tool he had modified for just such an occasion, and pressed the button. A loud, blaring alarm shrieked through the tranquility of the night. The sound sliced through the dark, tearing away the thieves' veneer of confidence. Their heads snapped up, eyes wide in sheer panic. Jake sputtered, his bravado evaporating in an instant. Roy stood unseen, his hand steady on the radio, reveling in the chaos he had unleashed. The alarm echoed like an angry beast, warning of danger, urgency punctuating the air. The sound prompted a transformation within the thieves. It shifted their focus from thieving to escape. Everything they'd hoped to gain slipped away in a flash. With urgency, Jake hissed, "Get out!" He shoved the door, but it wouldn't budge. Roy had secured all exits, and the shadows of thievery now loomed large, trapping them in a web of their own making. The realization hit them hard. They were caught. One of the thieves shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "Open the door," but Roy only watched, his heart a drum in his chest, anchored by the gravity of the situation. He echoed, his words cutting through the air. "You decided to break into my barn under cover of night. You think I would just let you go?" Inside the barn, the tension thickened like fog. The thieves glanced at one another, uncertainty flooding their minds. Trust began to fray, panic turned to desperation. Each sec that ticked by pushed them closer to the edge. "I'll call the cops," one declared, his bravado faltering as he reached for his phone. But before he could slide it out, Roy's voice sliced through again, a commanding presence that wrapped around the thieves like a vine. "If you do, you'll end up with a record. You'll be branded by the very choice you now regret." Fear danced in their eyes, raw and real. The notion of jail time hung heavy. Each thief swallowed hard. This wasn't just a matter of legal repercussions. It was a choice that might shatter their futures. Sarah, the lone female in the group, asked, her voice trembling now, stripped of bravado. Roy took a deep breath, stepping out of the shadows and toward the flickering lights. "I want you to understand what you've done." He paused, gauging their reactions. That word home carried weight. It was a place of dreams, silent struggles, and the fruit of years of labor. It wasn't just wood and tools, it was blood, sweat, and tears coated in memories. I could call the cops. I could make sure you never see the light of day again." His voice softened, wisdom weaving through his words. "You're here now." The uneasy silence returned, stretching longer than before. Roy stepped closer, feeling the pull of their desperation, their vulnerability. "I need hard workers on my farm. I could teach you about the land, about honesty, about hard work." "Yeah, Jake," Roy replied, locking eyes with him. "Sometimes it's easier to lose yourself in darkness than it is to climb toward the light, but I can show you the way." The air shifted. This was no longer just about thievery, it was a crossroads of choices where dark and light intermingled. One thief gazed at Roy, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "Why?" "Because I see you," Roy said, his voice steady. "I see your choices. And I see potential buried under fear. You want to change." The weight of his words slammed into them, reverberating in the charged atmosphere. A flicker of hope ignited where fear had once stood prominently. Could they choose differently? Could they redeem themselves? Roy took another step, inviting rather than threatening. "What do you say? No cops, no jail, just hard work and a chance." The silence was deafening, but a soft murmur began to emerge. One of them asked, the tremor in their voice hinting at a lifetime of battles. "Failure is just a story, one that doesn't end until you rewrite it," Roy replied, fierce determination in his tone. "There's more to life than fear, so why live in it?" Slowly, hesitance began to melt away. The thieves weighed their options, one heartbeat at a time. Their faces reflected the struggle, the embrace of shame and the tug of redemption mingled vibrantly. Finally, Jake stepped forward, his voice steadier now. "Okay, we'll do it." Roy's heart surged with relief and pride. He extended his hand and they clasped it gingerly, a pact forged in the midst of chaos. In that moment, they stepped from shadows into the flickering brightness of hope. With dawn approaching, the darkness began to lift. Roy led them out of the barn and into the daybreak that painted the sky in warm hues. There, they gathered their newly formed alliance. As sunlight spilled over the landscape and the birds began their morning songs, the thieves found a sense of belonging beyond the night. They had entered that barn as thieves, haunted by desperation. But as they breathed the fresh morning air, they began a new journey, not into theft or shadows, but towards purpose, hard work, and resilience, where Roy had shown them the way. In the dance between darkness and light, choices mattered, and for the first time in a long while, they felt the spark of belief ignite in their hearts. Life was a story still unwritten, and they held the pen. Above all, it was a reminder that even in the depths of struggle, change was possible. All it took was the courage to take the first step. Under the cloak of night, a thin veil of fog rolled over the sprawling fields, wrapping the quiet world in a shroud of mystery. Out in the rural expanse, where the distant chirping of crickets was the only sound, a single light flickered on in a modest farmhouse. There Roy, a farmer weathered by years of hard work, was doing the unthinkable. He was wide awake. Tonight felt different, a restless energy thrumming beneath his skin. He had worked all year, tended to his crops and livestock with love and care, but the nagging feeling that something was off pulled at his gut. Call it intuition, instincts honed through decades of toil and strife he just knew. As he tossed and turned, thoughts of his barn crept into his mind. Inside lay more than just equipment. It held the lifeblood of his hard labor, tools vital for a farmer like him. Meanwhile, three figures moved with practiced ease toward that very barn, shadows in their own right, driven by desperation and greed. They were clumped together in a way that spoke of camaraderie forged in misdeeds. Jake, the leader, crept forward, scanning their surroundings with adrenaline-fueled eyes. "This should be an easy score," he whispered, his voice carried by the whispering wind. Behind him, Sarah and Mike followed, hearts racing and nerves frayed. They weren't criminals by nature, but life had pushed them into this moment, coiling desperation around their minds like a snake. With each step, they crept closer to the barn's back door, unaware of the storm brewing just inside. "Let's just grab whatever we can before someone sees us." "In and out," Mike muttered as he fidgeted nervously. He eyed the rusted tractor nearby, its promise of quick money looming large. The thrill of the heist danced in the air, thickening the space around them with tension. But inside that very barn, Roy was not asleep. He was alert, slowly strategizing. The unease he felt had transformed into determination. He leaned over a small table scattered with papers, one eye on the window facing the barn. He wasn't a man prone to fear, but tonight felt different. Earlier that evening, he had noticed something unsettling. The tools he had meticulously organized were slightly out of order, a sign of someone having been there before. He'd seen this type of behavior among desperate folks driven to theft out of sheer necessity or poor choices. Roy had spent his entire life investing in his dreams, and this farm was the fruit of his labor. Returning to his senses, he grabbed the toolbox lying nearby. More than just a collection of tools, it was a symbol of his resolve. Roy had taken precautions before fences built, locks installed, but this time he felt something deeper. He sensed a clash on the horizon, and for the first time he was ready for it. Outside, Jake's voice broke through the veil of night. He looked back at Mike and Sarah, who nodded, spreading increasing layers of fear and excitement across the group. This was their chance, the moment they'd been waiting for. The door of the barn swung open with a low creak, their senses heightened, and as they stepped into the darkness within, a different kind of anticipation filled the air. Inside, the barn felt like a treasure trove. Tools hung from hooks in neat rows, while tractors stood sentry, their paint worn but still gleaming in the ambient moonlight. Each item whispered promises of easy money, shining brightly in the kids' eyes. They rushed in, already planning how to carry everything away. But what Jake hadn't accounted for was the darkness swirling not just around them, but within the confines of their own souls. As they filled their bags with tools and equipment, Roy observed silently through the crack in the door. The urgency of the moment twisted the air around him, excitement mingling with the stark realization that his sanctuary was being ripped apart before his eyes. Suddenly, Roy acted. He rushed through the barn, triggering the security alarm he had set up just days before. The sudden blast of sound shattered the night, a jarring siren that echoed like thunder across the quiet landscape. The thieves froze, fear painting their faces in stark hues. Panic replaced greed, and just like that, the mood shifted dramatically. Mike's eyes widened, and he dropped the tools he had just reached for. The alarm screamed like an injured animal, clawing at their insides, urging them to flee. "It's the farmer!" Jake shouted, his voice a sharp whip crack in the still night. They turned to exit but stumbled into chaos. The door they had entered through had suddenly seemed far too distant. Outside, Roy stood ready. He had opened the main entrance, illuminating the scene with bright floodlights, casting long shadows that danced across the dirt. He wasn't taking chances. In this moment, he was protector and warrior rolled into one. He had fought the elements, faced down Mother Nature's fury, and now he confronted the threat to his livelihood. His voice boomed through the air, reverberating against the wooden planks of the barn. The thieves stood paralyzed with shock, the siren still blaring in the background, a chaotic melody underscoring the clash of interests before them. Sarah pleaded, her desperation palpable. "We just need this stuff. We didn't mean to," but before she could finish, Jake, recovering his nerve, interrupted. "Let's go." He seized her arm, muscles tense as he urged them all to move, but panic had locked them in place. They were thieves, yes, but could they really wade through a storm of their own making? Roy pressed, stepping closer, anger simmering under his skin. "You'll ruin your lives for what? These tools?" For a moment, silence fell. Each thief weighed their choices, the grip of fear mixing with the ache of regret. Deep down, beneath the masks of bravado, they were drowning in uncertainty. They had chased dreams so far, but now their path led to this, the brink of ruin. Mike blurted, wrestling with his pounding heart. Roy could sense their fear. It surged through the air, something familiar and unsettling. He too had once felt unmoored in life, lost in a sea of choices he didn't know how to navigate. "Because life is more than what you choose to take from others," Roy replied, voice steady. "You think stealing will solve your problems. It'll only strengthen the chains around you. What happens when you get caught? What happens when you need something else?" They stood there under the floodlights, two worlds colliding, one founded on greed and desperation, the other on hard work and honesty. The barn echoed with possibilities. Each face showed flickers of doubt, shadows of inner battles playing out beneath the surface. Jake hissed, unwilling to back down, but his voice trembled. The thought of jail, of being caught, had twisted like a knife in his gut. Running away never solves anything, Roy pressed, stepping closer still. This could be an opportunity for change. Work for me. Sarah's eyes widened with disbelief, a crack in the belief that it was too late for all of them. You'd? She asked, incredulous. Roy replied, his voice now softer, like a balm to their raw wounds. You can choose to be trapped in this cycle or break free. The dilemma hung thick in the air. Shadows still swayed around them as the alarm continued to wail like a forgotten ghost. They were caught between fear and hope, a tightrope strung over the abyss. A quiet voice broke through. Mike asked, his voice a whisper drenched in uncertainty. Not if you choose to change, Roy answered, his sincerity piercing the heavy fog of fear. The choice is always yours. You took the first step by being here tonight. As they stood on the precipice of decision, the tide shifted. Each of them could feel the weight of their past actions and the chance of hopeful new beginnings coiling around their hearts. Finally, it was Jake who stepped forward, the bravado falling away like layers of paint stripped from an old barn. Okay, he mumbled, the admission struggling to escape. With a mixture of relief and tentative excitement swirling in the air, Roy extended his hand, a bridge over troubled waters. They might have entered that barn as thieves, but they could walk out with purpose. As dawn's first light broke, the raw beauty of the morning enveloped them like a long-forgotten embrace. They weren't just walking away from the shame of their mistake. They were crossing into a new chapter illuminated by possibilities and redefining their futures. In the days to come, Roy taught them how to sow seeds in the rich soil and reap the rewards of honest labor. It wasn't easy. They stumbled and faltered along the way. But he was there, offering guidance and even understanding when they fell back into old habits. Each sunrise became a testament to their growth, a newfound belief blooming amidst the crops. What began that one fateful night transformed into something extraordinary, a collective journey of redemption spun from the fabric of risk, fear, and courage. Change isn't made in sweeping gestures. It's forged one step at a time, climbing higher from the shadows into the light. And as each day unfolded, the real treasure didn't lie in the riches they once sought. It lay in the gift of hard work and the bond they forged in the glow of dawn, a spark ignited where once there had been fear. So remember, sometimes it takes a thief to discover the strength of honesty, to realize that true wealth is not locked in things, but in the hands of those who labor to build something meaningful. Sometimes a chance encounter may light the path, transforming wayward souls into the architects of their own destinies. The night was thick with tension, the kind that hangs in the air just before a storm. Rambling over the hills, a gentle breeze whispered secrets to the tall grass, while an ominous stillness settled over the farmlands. Out in that expansive solitude, Roy, a farmer hardened by years of labor, shuffled restlessly in his bed. Beneath the weight of his quilt, sleep eluded him. Something didn't feel right. His small farmhouse was nestled next to a sturdy barn, the smell of hay and earth wafting through the cracks in the rafters. That barn was more than just wood and nails to him. It was the heart of his life's work, filled with tools, memories, and pride. Each piece of equipment told a story. Every heavy tractor and rusty wrench held echoes of sweat and perseverance. And tonight, that heart felt vulnerable. Just as Roy began to drift into a fitful sleep, a noise shattered the stillness. It was faint at first, a tentative creak followed by the scuttle of footsteps. He sat bolt upright, heart pounding in his chest. It hit him then, thieves. The same unwelcome guests that plagued many a rural town, sneaking into homes, stealing the dreams held within the walls. With renewed energy coursing through him, he slipped into his boots and tiptoed to the window. 3 figures hunched low, creeping toward the barn. They were cloaked in shadows, moving with an unsettling blend of stealth and urgency. Roy's breath quickened. He could see them clearly now, one tall, one shorter, and the third with wild hair sticking out from underneath a hood, each clutching a flashlight. This was no ordinary night for them either. It was a heist in progress. As the trio edged closer to the door, Roy grabbed his phone. Rather than call the police, he decided to confront them himself. What he lacked in strength, he made up for in resolve. He had seen too many break-ins in his town, too many livelihoods ruined. Tonight would be different. He had prepared for this. With a steady hand, he turned off the lights in his house, then quietly moved to the barn, slipping behind the door. Inside, he had already set up a series of motion sensors just days before, a precaution that he had hoped would never be necessary. His instincts had served him well, and now their time had come. As the thieves finally pried the barn door open, a sudden wave of adrenaline surged through Roy. He watched from the shadows as they stepped inside, the moonlight spilling in behind them, illuminating their eager hands reaching out for his tools. The leader, a burly figure named Jake, whispered loudly, though he was oblivious to the commotion he was about to start. Heartlessly, they began rifling through everything, shoving items into their bags without a second thought. But what they didn't know was that Roy had prepared for an encounter like this, and he was ready to unleash a storm of his own. In his pocket, he held a small remote device created for high-tech security system installations he had picked up during his seeking of ways to protect his beloved barn. It was time to use that knowledge. With a deep breath, he pressed the button. Floodlights erupted around the barn, bathing the thieves in blinding brightness. Their hearts raced as bright beams lit them up like deer caught in headlights. They froze, shadows dancing chaotically across the walls. For a fleeting moment, everything stopped. The clinking of metal, the urgency, the panic, the laughter all faded. Roy stepped out from behind the door, his face a mix of disbelief and defiance. He boomed, his voice echoing off the wooden beams. Each thief jumped, their bags dropping to the ground with muted thuds. Jake, the leader, regained his composure first. Roy cut in, his eyes narrowing. Panic crept into the faces of the thieves as the reality of being caught seeped in. They glanced at each other, uncertainty splashing across their expressions. Roy stood tall, the glow of the floodlights highlighting the determination in his eyes. Roy continued, his voice steady but booming. The thieves shifted uncomfortably, guilt and uncertainty flashing through their eyes. They had walked into this thinking it would be a quick, easy score. But standing before them was not just a farmer. He was a guardian of his legacy, ready to fight for what mattered. "We weren't going to hurt anyone," Sarah, one of the thieves, stammered, nervously glancing at her two accomplices. "We need it," Roy echoed, his voice softening for a brief moment as he studied the trio. Each one looked like they had taken a wrong turn in life, and for some reason, that pulled at his heartstrings. It had been a long time since he felt compassion for anyone. "I don't know," Jake admitted, his bravado cracking like glass. "We didn't think, we just thought." Roy replied, disbelief woven into his words. "You think the world owes you something, but there was something deeper beneath the surface." Maybe it was the farmer's heart beating strong in the face of adversity, or perhaps the memories of his own youth shrouded in confusion, that reckless feeling of searching for a quick escape. He asked, his voice heavy with reality. Each thief stood quietly, the weight of their decision crushing down on them. They felt exposed, a mix of shame and vulnerability dancing through the air. In his eyes, Roy was no longer just a farmer. He was a symbol of their own mistakes, a living testament that mirrored their plight. Mike, the quiet one, broke the silence, his voice laced with desperation. "I want you to understand you don't have to live like this," Roy said, his tone shifting slightly. "You think this is the only way, there are better paths." Jake scoffed, but the tension in his voice hung on fragility. Roy stepped closer, shadows pooling at his feet while unwavering light surrounded the thieves. "I believe that every moment is a choice." The silence fell heavy once more. Each thief wrestled with the consequences of choices steeped in impulsivity. Fear and regret dripped through the night air like raindrops. Jake glanced at his friends, uncertainty translating his bravado into timid expressions. Sarah whispered, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. Roy's gaze softened. "It's never too late unless you think it is. I see potential in you. I see what you could be, not just what you've chosen to do. Why not work for me?" Mike echoed, disbelief mingling with hope. "Yes," Roy replied, his voice steady and unwavering. "Everyone deserves a shot at redemption. You can pick up the pieces and rewrite your story." The tension in the air shifted, hope fluttered gingerly, a fragile whisper. For the first time, the thieves felt a glimmer of possibility, a flicker of something that resembled a future. They had never thought this would be an option. It was as if Roy had handed them a map out of the twisting maze they'd been trapped in. One by one, they shared hesitant smiles, small but powerful. They were stepping out of the darkness. In this moment, they weren't just thieves caught in a compromise. They could become something more. And as dawn approached, its gentle light spilling over the horizon, warmth returned to their hearts. Roy reached out his hand for an official handshake, a promise wrapped in trust. Hesitant but eager, Jake was the first to step forward, watching the barn and its treasures unfamiliar yet enticing. "All right," Jake said, drawing a deep breath. "We'll do it." Sarah chimed in, voice almost trembling with excitement and fear. "Together," Roy affirmed, sincerity wrapped in undeniable benevolence. As sunlight broke across the hills, washing over the fields like a warm embrace, they stepped out of the barn, not as thieves who had stolen under the cover of darkness, but as partners ready to tread a new path. The days turned into weeks, and gradually the barn filled with laughter instead of guilt. Every morning they gathered to work the land, learning the ropes of responsibility, dedication, and hard labor. With each sunrise, they tilted their heads toward the sky, rising stronger with purpose and hope. Roy taught them how to plant seeds in the earth, how to nurture them and watch them grow. His patience cultivated skills buried under layers of bad choices, and slowly but surely, the embers of ambition ignited within them. With every weed pulled and crop harvested, they were rewriting the narrative of their lives. They learned about the satisfaction that came with hard work, the joy of seeing their efforts blossom into life. Through sweat and determination, Roy instilled lessons of perseverance and redemption, showing them that life could shift, that it was never too late for a second chance. In time, the thieves, now partners, became a part of the community, forging bonds that grew deeper than the soil they tilled. They shared meals, laughter, and stories of their transformation, ever mindful of the precipice they had once fallen from. Standing tall, drenched in the light of possibility, they found purpose where there had once been only despair. Together, they became witnesses to the power of second chances, defying the odds stacked against them. Every crop harvested, every smile shared became a testament to the change they fought for. And thus, under the vast expanse of the sunlit skies, a new legacy bloomed, rooted in hard work, grace, and the unshakable belief that choices define lives. In the end, it wasn't just about what Roy taught them. It was about what they discovered about themselves. Amid the fields of green and harvests of gold, they rewrote their destinies, forging their own path out of the darkness and into the light. The moon hung high, casting a ghostly glow over the sprawling fields. The night wrapped itself around the small farmhouse, thick and still, where only the quiet rustling of leaves offered any sound. Inside, Roy, a farmer hardened by a life of labor, lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his heart racing. He could feel that something was off. He glanced out the window, his eyes scanning the darkness. Years of working the land had sharpened his instincts, and tonight they were screaming at him to stay alert. There was a nagging sensation, a feeling that someone or something was lurking just beyond the threshold of his farm. Meanwhile, a few fields away, shadows slinked toward his storage barn, moving with purpose yet maintaining an air of caution. Three figures, their faces obscured by hooded sweatshirts, crept closer to the wooden structure, their hearts thudding with a mix of excitement and dread. This was their chance, their big score. They had been watching Roy for weeks, learning his routine. Tonight, while he slept, they would raid his barn, taking whatever they could sell. Jake, the leader of the group, took the lead with a flicker of a flashlight, illuminating the barn door. "This is it." His voice was a harsh whisper, adrenaline crackling between them. Behind him, Sarah and Mike nodded, fear etched on their faces but fire flickering within their chests. It wasn't about the items they would steal, it was about the thrill, the rush of taking something for nothing. They were desperate. Circumstances had pushed them to this moment where right and wrong blurred beneath the cloak of night. Inside the barn, Roy's instincts flared. He slipped on his boots, heart pounding as the stars glittered above, oblivious to the chaos below. He had anticipated this. The moment he noticed his tools out of place, he knew trouble was brewing. He had taken measures to protect his livelihood, securing locks, installing motion sensors, and rehearsing what he would do if the day ever came. As the thieves fumbled to open the barn door, Roy's breath steadied. He felt a sense of calm rising within him. Just then the door creaked open and the trio stepped inside, chuckling and whispering amongst themselves, blissfully unaware of the storm that awaited them. They scanned the room, eyes widening at the sight of shining tractors and racks overflowing with tools and machinery. In their minds, this was a treasure trove, but what was a treasure for them was his lifeblood, his years of hard work wrapped into every item in this barn. With purpose, they moved deeper into the shadows, stuffing tools into bags. "Grab the saws and the drill," Jake urged, excitement fueling their movements. The clinking of metal echoed in the darkness, mingling with their laughter. But while they lived in a moment of euphoria, their surroundings transformed into something far more sinister. Roy observed from a hidden vantage point, a mixture of anger and concern swelling within him. With every bag they filled, they were stealing not just tools, but pieces of him. Memories flashed in his mind, days spent under the sun, the joy of harvest, the sweat of labor. He couldn't allow this. That's when he made his move. Stepping out from his hiding place, he turned on the loud alarm he had installed just a few nights before. The piercing sound shattered the night, amplifying the chaos in an instant. The burglars froze as the alarm blared, their eyes wide with panic. Sarah gasped, stumbling back toward the door. They had come expecting an easy score, but now they faced a storm of their own making. "Get out!" Jake shouted, rushing toward the exit. But Roy had anticipated their moves and secured the barn's doors moments before, leaving them with nowhere to go. Roy's voice thundered, fueled by years of hard work and determination. With floodlights suddenly illuminating the barn, fear washed over the thieves like a chilling wave. They stood exposed, small against the backdrop of Roy's unwavering presence. "Please, we didn't mean any harm," Sarah whimpered, trembling as she processed the grave reality. Roy challenged, stepping forward, his heart pounding and yet resolute. "You could have asked for help, you could have worked for it." The tension was palpable, hanging heavy in the air like an invisible wall. The sound of the alarm faded, replaced by the rapid heartbeat of Roy and the tremors of regret in the thieves' eyes. They had crossed a line, but the question lingered. Could they step back? "Maybe we just lost our way," Mike murmured, his bravado crumbling. "And now look where you are," Roy replied, his voice firm yet not devoid of empathy. "Out of your depth and painted into a corner, but there's still time." Jake clenched his fists, confronting the strange mix of shame and defiance surging within him. "What do you suggest? You want us to just walk away?" Roy steadied himself, feeling the weight of the moment press down upon him. "No, but I will give you a choice. You can spend your lives running, or you can put in the work, learn what it truly means to earn something worthwhile. I could use help on my farm." The silence was thick, laden with uncertainty. Each thief wrestled with the implications of their choices, wondering if they were ready to step away from the darkness. They were desperate, yes, but was this a chance to rewrite their stories? Sarah whispered, the vulnerability in her voice slicing through the tension. "It's never too late unless you decide it is," Roy answered, stepping closer, the floodlights still casting a warm glow around them. "You have the power to change your path." The thieves exchanged bewildered glances, the weight of Roy's words seeping into them. They had sought an easy way out, but found themselves offered something far more valuable, a glimpse at redemption. Roy pressed. Jake hesitated, glancing at his partners before looking back at Roy, whose sincerity peeled away the layers of their doubts. "All right," he said finally, breaking through the thick fog of uncertainty. "We'll work for you, just..." Roy extended his hand, and in that moment a pact was formed, a crossroads where they could slip from shadows into light. Each thief took a step closer, and with it, the unseen chains binding them began to crack. As dawn broke and painted the sky with hues of gold and orange, the darkness of the night gradually lifted. The floodlights dimmed, but the glow of possibility sparkled in their eyes. Together they stepped out of the barn, not as thieves, but as new partners ready to embrace a different path. Over the following weeks, they toiled under Roy's watchful eye. Each sunrise brought with it the promise of hard work that would reshape their lives. They learned the rhythms of the land, how to cultivate, how to plant, and how to nurture. With dirt under their nails and sweat on their brows, they discovered a satisfaction that no stolen item could ever provide. Roy invested time in teaching them not just skills, but life lessons. He wanted more than just farm hands. He wanted to mentor them, With every lesson, they grew, more than just physically, mentally, and emotionally. On the farm, they found camaraderie, trust, and a renewed sense of purpose. Failure might have lurked around the corners, but they faced it together. They learned to lean on each other, growing together, transforming lost years into steps toward a brighter future. Months faded into seasons, and slowly the three thieves-turned-farmers embraced their new identities. Through hard work, they not only rebuilt themselves but also became part of the community they had once distanced themselves from. Neighbors began to recognize their efforts, understanding that redemption was a true journey, not just a one-time deal. And as Roy stood proudly amongst them, the weight of their pasts gradually lightened. They shared stories over evening meals, bonding through laughter and reflecting on how far they had come. It was no longer about what had been taken. It was about celebrating what they had built together. Eventually, they became a testament to the power of choices and second chances. The land flourished under their care, just as they did, standing shoulder to shoulder, and knowing they had forged a new narrative, one of resilience and purpose. Through their trials, they learned that sometimes the harshest realities could light the path to redemption. And it had all begun because a farmer was ready, not just to protect what he held dear, but to believe in three lost souls waiting for a chance to find their way back into the light. In the end, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the once thieving trio marveled at their transformation, the journey from darkness into redeeming light, and the future felt bright, filled with promise and hope. They had planted new seeds, and the harvest would shape not only the land but their lives for years to come. The moon was a bright sentinel in the night sky, casting an eerie glow over the sprawling fields of corn and soybean. The soft sounds of the countryside were gently interrupted by the distant rustle of leaves on the wind, a whisper of nature's secrets. Beneath this blanket of quiet, Roy, a dedicated farmer, tossed and turned in his bed. Something gnawed at him, pulling him from the depths of slumber into a state of heightened awareness. He had long learned to trust his instincts, and tonight they were on high alert. Outside, three figures moved stealthily across the property, silhouettes against the bluish light of the moon. They were cloaked in dark clothing, creeping toward the barn that had been the heart of Roy's life for many years. The three of them felt an adrenaline rush, a potent cocktail of fear and excitement. They had been watching the farm for weeks, learning Roy's routine, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Jake, the self-appointed leader of the group, scanned their surroundings. "This is it. Just grab the tools and anything that looks valuable." His voice was low, but the enthusiasm was palpable. Sarah asked, her eyes darting around, filled with unease. She had been swayed into this plan by the promise of quick cash, but doubt now crept in like a thief in the night itself. Mike chimed in, the third member of the group. "Think about the money we can make. We need this." With a mix of trepidation and hope, the trio edged closer to the barn door. Back inside the farmhouse, Roy crept to his window, peering through the curtain at the darkened figures gathering at the barn. His heart raced as he recognized the danger. They were the type of people who had learned to navigate the world by taking rather than earning. A fire ignited within him. He had fought for everything he owned, and he wouldn't allow that hard work to be ripped away. The night felt thick with tension as he grabbed his jacket and headed out the back door, his boots crunching on the gravel path. He hoped to catch them off guard, but he was also ready for a confrontation. The barn was where he had built his dreams, the tools and equipment integral to his life. It was not just a structure, it was a testament to a lifetime of labor. As the thieves finally pried open the barn door, a flood of moonlight illuminated their eager faces. They stepped inside, excitement pouring from them, and began rifling through tools. The sound of metal clanging against each other echoed around the barn, a chaotic symphony of their greed. But what they didn't realize was that Roy had taken steps to protect himself. Earlier, he had installed motion sensors around the barn, a precaution he hoped he'd never have to use. And now, their reckless laughter transformed into startled gasps as Roy hit the panic button hidden in his pocket. An alarm blared across the night, roaring like a beast awakened from a slumber. The thieves' faces, once filled with bravado, now morphed into shock. Jake screamed as the noise pierced through their bravado, scrambling to comprehend what was happening. Mike shouted, but before they could bolt, Roy burst through the barn door, a figure of authority against the backdrop of chaos. He stood tall, illuminated by the harsh light from the floodlights he had already turned on from the back. He declared, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had nothing left to lose. The thieves stood frozen, reality crashing into them like a wave. They were now deer caught in the headlights of a farmer who was more than ready for a showdown. "Please, we didn't mean to hurt anyone," Sarah managed to stammer, her voice trembling. "We just need some stuff." Roy studied their faces, a mix of fear and youthful regret brilliantly displayed. He felt a flicker of compassion battling against the fury boiling within him. Roy echoed, his voice laced with disbelief. This was no ordinary confrontation. Roy wasn't just defending his barn, he was standing up for every farmer who had ever endured a struggle. He understood what it was to aim for something in life, to work until your hands bled. He continued, stepping closer. Jake's bravado slipped further. He muttered, his head hung low. They had entered this barn with greed in their hearts, but now they stood confronted by the weight of their choices. "I want you to recognize that this isn't the way," Roy said, softening his tone. "You could have come to me for work, for help even, but you chose to break in. I could call the police, and I should." The silence was heavy, a vacuum where time seemed to stretch endlessly. Sarah glanced at Jake and Mike, uncertainty squirming between them. The gravity of their decisions suddenly felt too large to bear. Roy asked, his voice steady, "Prison sentences, a life overshadowed by this moment." Mike echoed, skepticism evident. "It starts with one step," Roy replied. "I've fought hard for every inch of land and tool I own." The words hung in the air, threading through the echoing barn, piercing hearts that had hardened into stone. The alarm blared on, but something shifted. There was a glimmer of something more than fear. It was the flicker of hope, one that had dimmed for far too long. Jake said hesitantly, his voice quieter now, more contemplative, "What if we worked, we could?" Roy paused, sensing the tide turning. "You're asking for redemption after entering here with ill intent." A nervous flicker of excitement coursed through Mike. "Like, exactly," Roy confirmed, his heart lifting with the prospect. "I need help. Farming is a labor of love, but it can't be done alone." Sarah asked, crossing her arms defensively, still uncertain about trusting this stranger offering them a lifeline. "Start by helping me get this barn back in shape," Roy instructed. "We'll work together, learn together." The three thieves exchanged glances once more, uncertainty lingering in their eyes, but a small seed of hope began to take root. For the first time, they had to consider a different reality, a future they had not envisioned for themselves. Roy pressed, his voice steady. After a moment of silence, Jake took a hesitant step forward. "Okay, we'll do it." Roy extended his hand, a gesture of goodwill, as a pact formed between them. The three, once thieves, accepted that they would now be partners, forging a future steeped in hard work and dedication. Outside the barn, dawn began to break, soaking the landscape in a golden light that promised renewal. The wave of hope washed over them as they emerged from the chaotic night, the alarm fading into the past. Weeks turned into months, and the promise of redemption hung in the breeze. Roy took them under his wing, showing them the ropes of farm life, moving in rhythm with the earth. It was not easy work. Sweat soaked their shirts, calluses formed on their hands, and exhaustion set in. But with every seed they planted, every weed they pulled, they felt lighter, shedding layers of guilt and remorse that had once weighed them down. Together, they tilled the soil, planted crops, and learned the seasons, the cycles of life that echoed the very struggles they faced. They transformed from lost souls into diligent workers, discovering the joy that comes from labor and the satisfaction of seeing your efforts bear fruit. Each day on the farm, they shared stories, laughter mixing with the sounds of nature, creating new memories to replace the dark ones. They learned what it meant to depend on each other, to dig deep and cultivate not just the land, but their own lives. Roy was not just a mentor. He became a guiding figure, instilling a sense of pride and self-worth in them. Day by day, they rebuilt themselves, learning the value of hard work and dedication, the very traits they had once bypassed for a fleeting thrill. One evening, after a long day's work under the sun, they gathered around a campfire, the warmth enveloping them like a soft blanket against the cool night air. The flickering flames danced as they shared their thoughts, dreams, and fears. Each story woven into the firelight served as a testament to how far they had come. Jake spoke first, voice steady yet tinged with emotion. "I remember the first moments in that barn, the rush of adrenaline," he began, reflecting back. "It feels surreal now." "We've transformed so much," Sarah added, her voice filled with wonder. "It's not just the work, it's about learning who we really are." Mike nodded, a smile breaking across his face. "We're not those people anymore. We're building something real, something honest." Roy watched the exchange, satisfaction blooming in his heart. He had opened the door for them to walk through, but they had done the hard work of stepping forward. Each one had faced the truth about themselves and emerged stronger. Underneath the stars, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, they had forged a bond that transcended their initial encounters. They had learned that life was not just about the choices made in anger or desperation, but about seeking redemption and rewriting narratives. As the fire crackled on and the night deepened, Roy leaned back in his chair, pride swelling within him. The dawn of new beginnings had replaced the darkness of that fateful night. They had journeyed together from brokenness to wholeness, each fulfilling their potential against the backdrop of the land they had come to love. And as the embers glowed softly into the night, it became clear that sometimes it took an unexpected confrontation to illuminate a new path. From thieves to farmers, they had become not just workers of the land but guardians of their stories, a testament to resilience, redemption, and the power of chance. Each sunrise brought with it the promise of hope. They had cultivated not just crops but their futures, thriving in the care of the earth and each other. The night was thick with silence, a quiet blanket draped over the vast expanse of farmland. The only sounds that dared to break the stillness were the distant chirps of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. In the heart of this rural landscape stood Roy's farmhouse, sturdy yet humble, adorned with memories and hard work. Inside, Roy lay wide awake in his bed, a nagging feeling stirring in his chest, a warning he could not ignore. Outside, cloaked in darkness, three figures slinked toward the barn like shadows rising from the very ground. These were not the kind of people you'd want to trust. They were desperate, driven by a gnawing need that twisted their morals into something unrecognizable. Jake, the unofficial leader, scanned the property, eyes wide with a mix of excitement and fear. "Let's do this quick, okay? Grab whatever we can." Behind him were Sarah and Mike, nodding in agreement but each harboring their own anxiety. Sarah whispered, glancing back toward the road. Jake hissed, trying to sound tough, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "We need this." The barn loomed before them, its weathered wood speaking of years of labor and love. As they crept toward it, every step felt like a risk, one they had chosen willingly but were now beginning to regret. They pushed open the door, its creak echoing through the night. Inside, the light was dim, and the wooden beams seemed to sigh under the weight of deep secrets. They fanned out, eyes gleaming as they spied tools hanging from hooks, tractors glistening faintly in the moonlight. Each item was a piece of someone's life, the irreplaceable product of sweat and toil. But to the thieves, it was all fair game. As they hastily stuffed their bags with whatever caught their eye, the tremors of apprehension steadily grew. Then, just as Jake was about to grab a shiny wrench, a loud, piercing alarm erupted like a beast roused from sleep. Jake shouted, eyes wide as he dropped the wrench. The alarm rang like an angry siren, the sound slicing through the stillness, surrounding them in chaos. Panicking, Mike turned to bolt for the door, but as if it had a mind of its own, it slammed shut with a deafening thud. The moment they heard that sound, their hearts plummeted. They were trapped. In that very instant, Roy stood behind a wall, his hand gripping a remote control. He had anticipated this. After noticing his tools slightly out of place just days before, he'd set up motion detectors and alarms. This night, he was ready. Roy bellowed, stepping into the bright emergency lighting that illuminated the barn. His silhouette loomed large in front of the thieves, a wall of defiance against the panic that gripped them. The trio recoiled, terror painted across their faces. They hadn't expected to be caught, let alone confronted by the person they were robbing. Sarah protested, desperation creeping into her voice. Roy met her gaze, and in that moment, a tempest of emotions collided: anger, fear, and something deeper, compassion. He shot back. Each thief exchanged glances, uncertainty radiating from them. They were here for a quick score, convinced they could vanish quietly into the night, yet they faced a man willing to stand for what mattered most. Jake broke in, his bravado waning, replaced by the sinking realization of the mess they had created. "We thought," Roy challenged, stepping closer, the alarm still blaring like thunder. "You think that taking from someone else will fix what's broken in your lives?" For a heartbeat, the air grew heavy with tension. The acknowledgement of their actions sank in, sharp and unforgiving. These thieves had crossed a line, and now they faced the reality of their choices. Just outside the barn, the flickering stars bore silent witness to their confrontation, the weight bearing down on them palpable and heavy. "We've made a mistake," Mike admitted, his voice faltering. "But we can change." Roy raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched across his face. "Change?" A moment of silence filled the barn, broken only by the shrill alarm that finally began to die down. In the dim light, fear transformed into something more, a flicker of hope, perhaps. If they could admit their mistakes, wasn't there a possibility for redemption? Sarah asked, her voice steadier now, a hint of determination shining through. "You could start by not running away," Roy replied, his voice firm yet hinting at understanding. "You can help me. My farm needs workers. You want a chance at redemption." Each thief stood frozen, weighing his words. The notion of working for a living seemed foreign yet strangely alluring. It was the idea that maybe, just maybe, they could turn their lives around. Jake repeated incredulously, glancing at his partners, who mirrored his uncertainty. "Then it's time you learn," Roy said, sensing the hesitation but pressing onward. "Hard work won't just teach you about the land. It can teach you about yourself." The very mention of hard work sparked both doubt and a glimmer of possibility. They had always taken the easy path, running from responsibilities, but what if Roy was right? Could they genuinely rebuild their lives? Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaking slightly but resolute. Roy met her gaze, something profound passing between them. "Trust is built through actions. If you're willing to put in the work, I'll be here to guide you." Jake hesitated, a whirlwind of doubt swirling in his mind. Then, glancing back at the tools they had initially intended to steal, he felt a tug in his conscience. "Fine," he murmured. "We'll do it." Roy extended his hand, standing tall as a man who fought for every inch of ground he gained. With a tentative grip, Jake clasped it, sealing a pact not just of work but of a shared journey toward redemption. Mike and Sarah followed suit, one by one, as they solidified their decision. As they stepped outside, the first light of dawn began to break across the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. They breathed in the slightly chilled morning air, the weight of the night's chaos beginning to lift. Together, they would embrace this chance to change, but it would require more than a willingness to work. Over the next few days, they tackled the farm with an intensity fueled by determination. From sunup to sundown, they learned to plant seeds, till the soil, and mend fences. At first, the work felt backbreaking, each ache a reminder of the life they had chosen to abandon. Yet as days turned to weeks, something remarkable happened. They found a sense of community in the rhythm of hard work. They laughed while pulling weeds and learned to appreciate the beauty of growing things. Each seed they planted held the potential for something exquisite, much like their lives could become. But just when it seemed they had settled into a new routine, a shadow from the past lurked on the horizon. One evening, as they wrapped up a long day of labor, the sun dipped low, and a familiar vehicle rattled into the gravel driveway, one they recognized all too well. It was a police car. The headlights pierced the evening's calm, and the figure of an officer stepped out, casting a long shadow across the ground. Roy's heart sank. He felt a sudden rush of anxiety, worry tightening his chest. The officer looked around, taking in the scene. The barn, once a site of break-in, fearlessly transformed into a hub of labor and hope. Came the voice of the officer, familiar yet heavy with unspoken consequences. But just as the officer opened his mouth to speak, the three former thieves, now farmhands, stood frozen, hearts racing at the sight of the law. What would they say? Would this be the end of their emerging redemption? Would they be returned to a life spent in shadows, shackled by their past? The officer asked cautiously, eyeing the scenario before him. It felt like a ticking tension, each second stretching out like an eternity. Mike's heart hammered against his ribcage as he glanced at Jake, who remained rooted in place. They could feel the breath of their past clawing at them, threatening to engulf the hope they had fought so hard to reclaim. And as Roy stood at the center of it all, determination filled his heart. He knew he had to choose his words carefully, to protect not just the farm, but the fragile lives that had begun to flourish within it. As the officer took a step closer, the world felt like it was teetering on the edge of a precipice, both the weight of the past and the promise of the future hanging in the balance. Would redemption slip through their fingers, or could they seize the moment and forge a new path together under the watchful eyes of the night?